No specific arguments for God, but would like to have a general discussion about Jesus. So
Yay.
Another caller who is called
Hello,
on the
Paul.
perfect day. Hi, Paul.
Hi.
You're on with Tracie
You've come
and
to the right
David.
place. Hey, Paul.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound fine.
Awesome. Well, go easy on me because my heart's been beating out of my chest for the last hour.
Brother,
nervous.
am I become your enemy because I tell you the truth?
No. No, I love you guys. No, atheists are, in my opinion, fun to speak to.
Thank you. And I appreciate you calling in because, and honestly, here's the thing, and I really believe this. If you being a Christian makes you happier, makes you a better person, makes the world a better place, I'm all for it. Go for it. And I don't want to talk you out of that. If you have asked my opinion about Christianity, that's a different thing.
Okay.
Because I think Christians, for the most part, they're Christians for good, logical, rational reasons that have nothing to do with Christianity being good or rational.
That is super cool, but Paul has a point to make.
Sorry, Paul. First time on the show.
Will you repeat that, David? That they're logical, but they have, sorry, what?
What I was saying was, the Christians I know, and I'm thinking specifically of my friend Sean McDowell, who's Josh McDowell's son, it would make no sense for him to be an atheist because he has got good, strong, rational reasons for being a Christian that have absolutely nothing to do with whether Christianity is true or right or rational.
Okay. Well, I would say with respect to that person, then he doesn't have a very good reason at all.
I would agree. I would agree, but tell us, that is my truth. Tell me yours.
Well, my truth is that I was going to college about 5 years ago, and I was going through a very difficult time of my life. Forgive me for using the phrase sin or the terminology, I suppose.
Tell us all about these sins.
No,
Please go into detail.
No, Paul, just go continue with your point.
For the sake of my dignity, I'd rather not go into my sins. But Jesus saved me 5 years ago, and ever since then, it's been a beautiful journey getting to know him. I had just a momentary question.
Oh, and I have so many questions for what you just said, but please do give us your question.
You said something about Paul mentioning false apostles in Galatians.
Yeah.
I wanted to know where that was.
That's, I believe, in chapter 2 of Galatians. I mean, Galatians is a short book, so it's not hard to find. I want to say it's the second chapter of Galatians, where he goes and meets the Jerusalem church leaders for the first time, and he says things like, when I met them, I didn't give in to them for a moment. They brought in false believers to steal our liberty. Who they really were, God only knows. I don't know who these guys are. And then pretty much all the interactions he has with them in Galatians is acrimonious, and he brags about going to James in face and confronting him. And when you read Luke's account of all these things and the early church, Luke whitewashes all of this. He is so at pains to make everybody in Christianity, and even outer sources like John the Baptist cult and the Pharisees and all these different like marginal groups like women and children, he wants to bring them all into the fold. And so he whitewashes it all as if they were all in the same, one big happy family and all on the same page. And at every point where Luke is talking about something that Paul talks about, at every single point he's getting it wrong, deliberately so, because he's whitewashing it to make it seem like there was never any disputes, never any disagreements. He has Peter have that vision where the sheet comes down and everything's that was unclean is now clean, and we don't have to worry about that anymore. When we read the Gospels, that was already supposedly settled by Jesus decades ago, and yet he feels the need to put it into another apostle's mouth.
Okay. Well, I was looking through Galatians for a moment, and please understand, I'm no historical scholar of this. I'm just an immature Christian who's been working on it. But it looks like in Galatians 2, Paul meets Peter, James, John. maybe I'm not. Like I said,
No.
I don't have all this as.
Yeah, and I want to make it very clear. I believe those were real people. Peter, James, and John were real people. They really existed. They really were leaders in the Jerusalem church. And what mythicists like me argue is that when the gospel writers decades later were making their stories, the allegorical stories about Jesus, they took the names from people in Paul's letters, from people who were known to be Christians, and made them characters in these gospels.
Okay.
But that said, when you just read what Paul has to say about who these guys are, you would never guess that they were Jesus' friends and family. And in fact, when we read in the New Testament epistles, when they're telling us what an apostle is, they're not saying, oh, it's the 12 guys who follow Jesus. No, they say an apostle is somebody like me who found Jesus in Scripture and in visions and in my Bible searching of the Hebrew Scriptures. I found him talking to me, and we even see this with people like Clement, early church leaders, who said that as Jesus said, and then they'll quote something from Ezekiel or Isaiah, and it's like they don't see any problem with that, with putting words into Jesus' mouth. Just like early Christians didn't have any problems later putting words into Paul's mouth.
Well, with the idea of, I mean, you made an interesting point that I'd like to touch on, and that's the idea of visions and scriptures and finding Jesus in them. Why would you say? I mean, I know that it's tough as a person who hasn't experienced that to agree with that, because there's no evidence for that, right? It's just someone's testimony. But why, if they're being honest, why does that testimony make it any less real?
Well, first of all, I believe that your testimony is honest. I don't know about that, about the people who wrote the New Testament, because we keep catching them in lies and untruths. And even just the archaeological evidence for the New Testament, when you see, one thing that Bart Ehrman says is that when you look at early Christian writings, the most remarkable thing about them is the extent to which they're forged and altered by rival Christian factions, so that we have different gospels and different epistles saying the opposite things, and it's very hard for even devout Bible-believing Christian scholars who are equally educated to know which is the original reading.
Okay, I'm trying to make sense of my thoughts here. Okay, so ask me about my story, will you?
Let me ask you this. If you were a Muslim caller trying to tell me about the glory of the Quran and how, giving up pork and worshiping Allah changed your life, I would be nodding my head at the same way and saying, yep, okay. And if you were a Mormon saying, yeah, I was a really bad person, and then these guys knocked on my door, and Joseph Smith's word gave me a burning in my bosom, and now I live according to Mormonism, and life is great, I don't really have any argument against that, and I don't, as long as it makes you a better person, I don't even have any particular objection to it. It's just when we're mistaking the truths of being a better person and making changes to your life with historical truth, when we're mistaking mythological truths for empirical truths, that's where we get in trouble.
Well, when you say empirical truth, I think that can be objective to each person. But see, for me, it's not about.
Yeah,
I think you mean subjective, Paul.
It's okay.
Sorry,
yeah.
Okay, but fair enough.
For me, it's not about being a better person. That's not what it's about for me. It's about finally having found the truth of reality. I sought the truth of reality for a long time. I was an atheist myself, or an agnostic atheist from maybe my early teens.
Can I ask you what led you to choose that path?
Yeah, I thought it was cool. I thought it was hip.
No, I mean, when you were raised, was it a lack of religion, or had you rejected religion, or?
No, well, my mom and I and my sister, we went to church for a few brief times. But when my sister and I were going to church, we just played in the pews, and we brought our Game Boys or laughed at each other. We didn't learn anything. But what hit me was, I found out one day that the tooth fairy wasn't real, and I found out that Santa Claus was a lie. And I was like, well, okay, what makes God different, right?
And you know what? I think that's an awesome question.
So for a long time, and also I think at some point I had a philosophical teacher who just, I was, I envied his knowledge, I suppose, a bit, and I just wanted to be more like him. And from there, I started being somebody who, in fact, spoke against Jesus. Somebody who.
What does that mean? What does that mean in this context, speaking against Jesus?
Well, for example, my mom has been a believer all her life. And there were points at which I was just like, well, where is God? I see no evidence for God. How God isn't real. I said this to my mom, and I was naturally that hurt her.
Yeah.
But since then, I've changed. I from being an adolescent to 25. That's the time span of which I did not believe.
It's funny because that's the same time span where I went from being a true blue Southern Baptist who believed it all and everyone thought was going to be a preacher to becoming an atheist. Exactly that same time.
Well, I'm hoping to be a preacher, so we're kind of on.
We are just missing each other.
But I mean, so I didn't come to Christianity easily. By no means. I was at my last straw in life. Perhaps not my last, but I was pretty far up there before God found me and He saved me, and it was all because I did one simple thing. He was showing me various things in that time, and
I guess I do need some specifics. What specific thing did you do, or did He show you, or?
Well, as I said, it's very subjective for each person. But for me, it was little signs. Like, you would laugh at me to even hear them, but it's the truth. Is that when I was going through a hard time for any particular reason, I would find various feathers just randomly, and I thought to myself, "There's something about these." It was always at very coincidental, specific times in my life. There was another time where I was in class just going through. See, I went through a lot of anxiety.
Have you found that being a Christian reduces that anxiety?
Yes, it does actually.
That's what I was referring to, is that most people who are Christians have good, rational reasons for being Christian that have nothing to do with Christianity being rational. That's a real evolutionary advantage that you gave yourself by embracing Christianity.
Well, I don't believe in evolution, but I understand what you're saying. But even if I didn't have those, I would still be a Christian because I know it's true. So
when you say you know it's true, not to get all epistemological on you, but how do you know it's true?
Well, and that's the thing, is that it is subjective. It is subjective.
What if your Muslim friend or your Mormon friend or fill in the blank, whichever voodoo space religion friend you have, they came up to you and started talking about how their life changed when they went to the fill in the blank religion? How would you win them over to Christ?
Well, I don't have very many people telling me about the things that I've experienced.
But what I'm trying to say is, what you're giving us is not much to hang a hat on, and it's like, well, I'm glad the feathers,
Yeah, it's like if you were finding condor feathers, I'd be impressed. But feathers are very common. I mean, there's birds all over the place that shed feathers and lose feathers and get eaten by cats.
Yeah, not to make too much fun of you, but I mean,
I'm not making fun. I'm just pointing out that the idea of finding feathers is kind of like saying every time I look down, I found a pebble.
Yeah, and I expect waiting for the punchline, but then what really happened was blah, 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 and I'm sure there is a moment like that, but it's like, what I'm trying to say is that there are what, 7 billion people on the planet right now, and every one of them who is a major religion, actually, full stop, every one of them who is religious has a story like that. But they can't all be
Guys,
true. They can all be false, but they can't all be true.
I said to you guys before I even mentioned that you would laugh at me.
I'm not laughing. Here's the problem, though, that I have, and this is something I've talked about before. This is the issue with when somebody says about, praying for a sign or asking for a sign or receiving a sign. These signs can literally be anything, anything. There is no way to confirm that that the feathers were from God or they were just feathers. And
okay, but Tracie, I agree with you. I agree with you, and that's why I say it's subjective. But let me.
But it's the meaning you're putting on it is subjective. But there is nothing. There's nothing that is subjective. There's nothing subjective about the fact that feathers are everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, there is when you experience them like I do. But with
but you haven't told us about your feather experience.
That feathers are everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean,
guys, let me put out a point, okay? You're kind of speaking over me. If God is about faith, okay, and I believe that atheists oftentimes have a different perspective on faith than Christians do. But are you guys still there?
Yeah.
We're waited with bated breath to hear what's coming up next.
Oh, by the way, I'm so glad I'm not speaking to Matt. Matt is so.
I know. It's the worst,
let's
right?
not waste time because we've got maybe a couple minutes and I've got to move on to another call. So wrap up quick.
Okay, sure. So the thing is this: if God is a God of faith, and you have to have faith to come to know Him, there are two things that are important to note here, and that I say sincerely. You cannot come to know God, and this is in the Bible, until He calls you. You cannot know God until He calls you.
Yeah, this is proselytizing, and I'm going to just say, if you don't have something to support this beyond a feather, then this is just calling and preaching. You don't know this about God. You don't know this from a feather. And
if you're going to talk about faith, let's talk about blind faith. What if a guy comes up to you and says, we have to kill all the Jews? This feather proves it to me.
Right. I mean, the idea that you came to God for these feathers.
You're going back to things that are plainly rude, if I may.
All right. However, so anyway, we're moving on to.
But just putting out there, I mean, talk to us again, but it's like, you're not giving us anything.
No, don't.
You're not even giving us
You don't get to call the show and preach.
Yeah.
You don't get to call the show and be unchallenged. You don't get to just call and start talking about what you know about God and then give no other reason than, well, my truth is subjective and I found a feather and I found a bunch of feathers at times in my life when I was distressed.
Absolutely.
The fact is, you have got to, when you just start making bald-faced claims about what you know about God.
That could be made by any religion on the planet.
And there are plenty of shows that have theists preachers. We don't need to convert the Atheist Experience into a show where theists call in just to preach.
And just saying, you don't know what rude is. That was not rude.
Yeah, you really don't. I mean, I just don't. That was, I think, what got me. If this is considered rude, then you need to not call the show when I'm hosting because you're going to get more of the same. So maybe choose another host and go down that route because I don't believe that I was rude to this person. I think that it was a matter of them not respecting the parameters of the show, which is that you have to actually back up what you're going to get called.
And you have to have a point. This seemed like it was just going to go on and on and on.
It was going on to here's how you find God and here's how God works in your life. Yeah. And that's not what the show is for.
I've never heard this before.
Okay, so we're moving on to number 4. This